Most people dread coming home to an empty house. I came home 3 days early, and I have spent every day since wishing I had stayed away just a little longer. Not because of what I found waiting for me, but because of what I almost missed forever. Welcome back to American Home Voices. Settle in, get comfortable, and before we start, I want you to remember something. The people in this story had every opportunity to make different choices. They simply chose not to. Drop a comment below and subscribe if you haven't already. You are going to want to be here for this one. Let me tell you something about being married for 31 years. After 3 decades of sharing a kitchen, a mortgage, and every single Sunday morning with the same person, you develop something that goes beyond love. It becomes instinct. You don't just know your partner. You feel them. The way the air shifts when something is wrong. The way a silence can carry weight that words never could. I have felt that shift exactly 3 times in my marriage. The first was the night my wife's father passed. The second was the morning our youngest was born 6 weeks early. The third was the afternoon I pulled into our driveway in Ballarat and knew, before I even turned off the engine, that something in my home had gone deeply wrong. My name is Daniel Whitmore. I am 63 years old. I spent 34 years as a civil engineer working on infrastructure projects across Victoria, and I retired 2 years ago with a clean desk, a decent super balance, and the full intention of spending the rest of my days fishing with my mate Gordon, watching cricket, and finally reading the stack of books on my bedside table that my wife Elaine kept threatening to donate to the library. Elaine is 61. She taught primary school for 27 years before her own retirement 18 months ago. She is patient in the way that only someone who has spent decades managing 28 8-year-olds simultaneously can be patient. She is warm and sharp and funny, and she makes the best lamb roast I have ever eaten in my life. And I have told her that every Sunday for 31 years, and I mean it every single time. We have one daughter, Sophie. She is 34, married to a man named Bryce Callahan for the past 5 years. They live 40 minutes from us in a house that Elaine and I helped them with the deposit on. Because that is what you do. That is what you do when you love your children. You help. You give. You assume. Because you have to assume, because the alternative is something you cannot let yourself think about, that the love goes both ways. I had been up in Cairns for 11 days. My old colleague Neville had retired to far north Queensland the year before and had been inviting me up since Christmas to come fish the reef with him. Elaine had encouraged me to go. She said, and I remember this clearly because I have replayed it many times since, "Daniel, you have earned this. Go. I will be perfectly fine. Sophie and Bryce are just down the road if I need anything." I booked the flights and went. On day 9, Neville took a bad fall on the boat. Nothing life-threatening, a broken wrist and badly bruised ribs. But he was out of action, and I was not about to spend 2 more days rattling around his house while he lay on the couch apologizing. I booked an earlier flight, called no one, and told myself I would surprise Elaine. Maybe pick up that bottle of Shiraz she liked from the cellar door on the way through Daylesford. Maybe actually sit across from my wife at dinner without one of us falling asleep in front of the television by 7:30. I was feeling good. I should have paid more attention to my instincts. The first thing I noticed when I turned into our street was Bryce's ute in the driveway. Now, Bryce is not what you would call a drop-in kind of person. In 5 years of marriage to my daughter, Bryce has never once arrived at our house without it being scheduled at least a week in advance. He is the sort of man who sends a calendar invite for Christmas lunch. Seeing his ute sitting in my driveway on a Wednesday afternoon was not unusual. It was strange. It was the kind of strange that prickles the back of your neck before your brain has caught up. I sat in the car for a moment. I said, out loud, to no one, "Daniel." So I grabbed my bag and walked to the front door. The second thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the easy quiet of an empty house or the comfortable quiet of two people who have been together long enough not to need noise. This was a different kind of quiet. Thick, deliberate. The kind of quiet that exists because someone is being very careful not to make any sound. I pushed the door open. Sophie and Bryce were sitting at the kitchen table, not talking, not looking at their phones, just sitting, in the way that people sit when they have already settled something between themselves and are waiting for the next part of a plan to unfold. Sophie looked up first. And here is the thing I need you to hold on to, because this is the detail that rearranged everything. My daughter, who had no reason to expect me for another 3 days, did not look surprised. Not a flicker. Not a blink. Her face did a very quick, very controlled thing that I recognized because I had seen it before in my working life on projects that were going sideways. It was the look of a person recalculating. Bryce smiled. It was the wrong kind of smile for 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday in a house where neither of them should have been. I said, "Sophie, what's going on? Where's your mum?" She stood up and said, "Dad, we were just about to ring you. Mum had a bit of a turn this morning. She's at Ballarat base. But she's stable, so we didn't want to." I did not hear the rest. I was back in my car in under a minute. I called Gordon on the way. Gordon Marsh has been my closest friend since we were both 22 years old and sharing a house in Carlton with no hot water and furniture we found on council cleanup day. The man has seen me through 2 redundancy scares, the death of my father, and the absolute disaster that was my attempt at home brewing in 2008, which I will not be elaborating on. If there is anyone in my life who will give it to me straight, without softening the edges, it is Gordon. He answered on the second ring. "Danny, you're back early." "Elaine's in hospital," I said. "Ballarat base." I just got home and Sophie and Bryce were sitting in my kitchen like 2 people waiting for the second act of something. Silence. "What do you mean?" "Waiting." "Gord." My daughter did not react when I walked through the door. I was supposed to be in Cairns until Friday. She just looked at me and recalculated. A longer silence. Then quietly, "Danny, I need you to keep both hands on the wheel." "I'm fine. You're driving too fast." "That's not fine." He wasn't wrong. Ballarat base was 12 minutes from our house. I made it in 8. I will not be taking questions about that either. Dr. Anita Sharma met me at the nurses' station. She was composed and direct in the way that good emergency physicians are. The kind of doctor who understands that what a frightened person needs more than anything is someone who will not flinch. I was grateful for that. I needed someone who would not flinch right then. She said, "Mr. Whitmore, your wife was brought in this morning by your daughter. She presented with significant disorientation, elevated liver enzymes, and some kidney markers that are concerning. We're running a full panel." I said, "What does that mean? Is she sick?" "Did something." She looked at me steadily. "Mr. Whitmore, I want to be honest with you. The presentation we're seeing is not consistent with a sudden illness. The markers we're looking at suggest a pattern of accumulation, something that has been developing over a period of time." That word, accumulation. It arrived like something physical. I gripped the edge of the desk and said, very carefully, "Dr. Sharma, are you telling me that someone has been doing something to my wife?" She held my gaze and said, "I'm telling you that we need more information, and I believe you may need some as well." I went in to see Elaine. I have seen my wife in every possible state over 31 years. I have seen her laugh until she had to excuse herself from the table. I have seen her face on the night her mother passed. I have seen her furious, radiant, exhausted, relieved, heartbroken. I was not prepared for what I saw in that room. She looked diminished. That is the only word for it, as though something had been slowly, quietly turning down a dial inside her. And no one had noticed because it had happened too gradually, too carefully, too deliberately to register as wrong until it was very, very wrong. The machines beeped. The drip ran. My wife, the woman who once stood in a school corridor and reduced a particularly difficult parent to tears, with 12 words and a tone of voice I would not wish on anyone, lay there looking impossibly small. I sat beside her. I took her hand. And I made her a promise, which is not something I do lightly. I told her I was there. I told her I was not leaving until I understood exactly what had happened to her. Then I kissed her hand and walked back out to the waiting area. Sophie and Bryce had arrived. Of course they had. Sophie stood up and said, "Dad, we should talk. There's a lot." I held up one hand. Something in my expression communicated exactly where we stood, because she stopped mid-sentence. I said, "Not now, love." Then I walked to the far end of the waiting room, sat down, pulled out my phone, and did the thing they did not see coming. I started locking every account they had access to, every single one, and when the notifications began hitting their phones, because I knew they would, I watched Bryce's face first. That easy. Arranged smile dropped so completely and so quickly that it was almost medically interesting. Good. Now we were having a real conversation. I just wasn't ready to have it yet. Let me tell you something about denial. Denial is not stupidity. Denial is a survival mechanism. It is your mind protecting you from information you are not yet equipped to process. I had been living in a low-level version of it for longer than I care to admit. Little things I had explained away. The way Bryce had started asking questions about our finances that felt a degree too specific. The way Sophie had suggested, very helpfully, very lovingly, about 8 months ago, that perhaps Elaine needed someone to come by more regularly while I was out at my weekly volunteer work. Elaine had twisted her wrist badly last winter. Not serious, but enough to make mornings difficult for a few weeks. Sophie had offered to come by every morning to help with breakfast, with her medication, with making sure everything was sorted before she got on with her day. At the time, I told Gordon, "Maybe I've been too hard on Bryce. Maybe they're coming good. I want to go back and have a very stern conversation with my past self." I sat in that hospital car park at 9:30 that night, with Elaine hooked up to machines 30 meters above me, and I evicted denial permanently. Changed the locks on the whole operation. I called Gordon. He answered before it had finished ringing once. "Talk to me." "She looks terrible, Gord." My voice did something on that last word that I will not be elaborating on. The doctor used the word accumulation. Said it's been building over time. Not sudden. I heard him exhale slowly. Then, "Danny, building means deliberate." I know what it means. And Sophie and Bryce were in the house. Sophie was coming by most mornings, for months. Since the wrist. Silence. Then, Gordon said something I have not forgotten. "Brother, you need to think carefully about who had access to everything Elaine ate, drank, or took as medication. Every day, for the past several months, you need to think about who was around and when." I already knew. I just hadn't let myself know it yet. When I went back inside, Bryce was standing near the vending machine with his arms crossed, wearing the expression of a man who has rehearsed his innocence so thoroughly he had started to believe it himself. Sophie was seated with her phone face down on her lap. Now, my daughter is never without her phone. The woman sleeps with the thing on the nightstand with the volume up. A face-down phone meant she was either waiting on a call she didn't want me to see, or she had already made one. I sat directly across from them both. Bryce said, "Dan, I know this looks. Does it?" I said, "Walk me through how you think it looks, Bryce, because I am genuinely curious." He shifted in his seat. "Elaine's been having health issues for months. We were worried. Sophie was coming by to make sure she was eating right, taking her supplements. Her supplements, I said. Yes. Which ones? He blinked. What? She takes 4 different things in the morning. Which ones was Sophie giving her? He looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at her phone. That exchange, those 4 seconds, told me everything I needed to know that I didn't already know. I stood up. I need you both to go home. Bryce started. I said his name once. Quietly. The way my own father used to say mine, when I was standing at the edge of a decision I could not undo. That was all. They left. I sat in that waiting room with a cup of hospital coffee that tasted like warm regret, and I did what any reasonable 63-year-old man who suspects his daughter and son-in-law of poisoning his wife would do. I started going through the finances. I am not a forensic accountant. I am a retired engineer who still does his tax return by hand because I do not trust software I cannot see the inside of. But I did not need to be an expert to see what was in front of me. There were withdrawals from our joint household account going back 5 months. Small ones. The kind that do not shout at you. 250 here. 400 there. Once. 650. Spread out. Staggered. The sort of amounts a busy person might notice and explain away as everyday spending. When I added them up, I was looking at just over $14,000 over 22 weeks. Sophie had emergency access to that account. We had set it up 4 years ago after I had a minor cardiac scare. Nothing serious. A warning shot. The cardiologist called it, but enough that Elaine and I decided it was sensible to make sure Sophie could access funds if something happened and I was unable to manage things. I had trusted her with that access, the way you trust the people you raised. Completely. Without condition. I called Gordon at 2 in the morning. He answered like it was noon on a Saturday. 14,000, I said, without preamble. From which account? The joint household. Small amounts. Consistent. Over 5 months. Quiet. Then, Danny, that's not impulsive. That is planned. Someone sat down and worked out exactly how to do this without triggering anything. I said, my daughter, and the 2 words nearly finished me right there in that waiting area at 2 in the morning. My daughter sat down and planned this. We don't know the full picture yet, Gordon said carefully. Gord, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I know you do, mate. The next morning, Dr. Sharma found me where she had left me, looking like a man who had been dragged backwards through the previous 18 hours, which was accurate. She sat down beside me, which told me something before she had said a word, and she said, Mr. Whitmore, the full panel is back. I said, give it to me straight. She said, your wife has elevated concentrations of a compound consistent with prolonged exposure to a specific heavy metal. The levels we're seeing are not consistent with accidental ingestion. They are consistent with deliberate, consistent administration over a period of months. Her liver and kidneys are both under stress. We have begun treatment. I want you to know that we caught this. She has a strong chance of full recovery. I closed my eyes, just for a moment. Then I opened them and said, if someone was doing this deliberately, how would they do it? She paused. Then very carefully she said, it could be introduced through food, through drink, through supplements, particularly anything in powder form that dissolves easily and carries no distinct taste. Sophie, bringing breakfast every morning. Elaine, taking her supplements without question, because why would she question them? Her own daughter was bringing them. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped the linoleum. Dr. Sharma put a hand on my arm. I need to make some calls, I said. I called my solicitor first. Margaret Okafor has been my solicitor for 16 years. She is a compact, precise woman in her mid-50s who has the energy of someone who has been waiting her entire career for someone to bring her a case this well documented. I told her everything: the withdrawals, the supplements, the access, the timeline. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "Daniel, do not go back to the house. Do not confront either of them. Do not message them, post anything, or give any indication that you are doing anything other than sitting by your wife's bedside. Can you do that?" She said, "I can do that." Good. Because when this lands, it is going to land completely. Within 25 minutes of having the remaining accounts restructured and access removed, my phone began ringing. Sophie, 3 times. Then Bryce, twice. Then a text from Sophie that read, "Dad, what have you done? We can't access anything. You need to call me right now. This is not okay." I read that message several times. This was my daughter, the little girl I had taught to ride a bike in the Bunnings car park because the street outside our house had too much traffic. The one who used to fall asleep on my chest watching the cricket when she was 4. The one who had hugged me at her wedding and said I was the best father she could have imagined. I had believed her. I typed back one sentence: "You should have thought about that before you touched your mother." I put my phone in my pocket and went back upstairs to sit with Elaine, because she was the only thing that mattered right now. She was going to recover. Dr. Sharma had said so, and when she woke up, I was going to be the first face she saw. But there was something cold and purposeful sitting in my chest where the fear had been. $14,000 and a deliberately poisoned wife do not happen without a destination. Patient, calculated people like this always have a destination. I called Gordon again that night. He answered immediately. "How is she?" "Stable. Treatment is working, thank God." A long breath. Then, "What do you need?" "I need you to find out," I said, "if Elaine recently changed anything. A will, a superannuation beneficiary, an insurance policy, anything with my name or Sophie's name on it. I need to know if there was a reason for the timing." Silence. Then Gordon said, quietly, "Danny, you think this is about the estate?" I said, "I think my daughter needed $14,000, badly enough to take it without asking, and I think whatever she needed it for was just the beginning." Gordon exhaled. "I'll make some calls," he said. I didn't know it yet, but by the next morning, Gordon was going to find something that made $14,000 look like loose change at the bottom of a handbag, and it was going to change the entire shape of what I thought I understood. Revenge, I have learned, does not require fury. It requires clarity. It requires patience. It requires the willingness to sit with the full weight of what has been done to you, and to act from that weight rather than from the heat of it. I had never thought of myself as a patient man by nature. 34 years of engineering teaches you precision, but not always patience. This, I decided, was going to be the most precise thing I had ever done. Gordon called at 6:48 in the morning. I know the time because I was watching the clock, willing it forward so I could go back in to check on Elaine. He did not say hello. He said, "Danny, sit down." I was already sitting. "Tell me." 7 months before Elaine had ended up in that hospital bed, she had visited a financial planning firm in Melbourne, alone, without telling me, which, if you know Elaine, means she was planning a surprise of some kind. Elaine does not do things alone that she thinks I should know about, unless the thing is a gift or a gesture. She had the instincts of a person who believes that good things are worth presenting properly. What she had done was quietly, carefully update her superannuation death benefit nomination. Both of us had contributed consistently over long careers and had made smart decisions along the way. Sophie had been listed as a secondary beneficiary for years, A default arrangement made when she was young, and we were making the kinds of practical decisions young parents make. Elaine had gone in to have Sophie removed from the nomination entirely. She had decided to redirect her share to a literacy foundation she had been building in her own time, a small organization providing books and reading support to children in regional Victoria who were falling behind. She had never told me because she wanted to present it as a finished thing, a working thing. That was Elaine. She never showed you the seed. She showed you the tree. The combined value of Elaine's superannuation death benefit was $1.8 million. Sophie had found out. I still do not know precisely how. Perhaps a document left out. Perhaps an overheard conversation. Perhaps the estate planning firm had sent a confirmation letter. The how almost doesn't matter. What matters is that Sophie had discovered her mother was about to remove her from a $1.8 million nomination. And instead of picking up the phone and talking to us like an adult, she and Bryce had sat down together and decided the most reasonable response was to make sure Elaine did not live long enough to finalize the change. The financial planner had a processing window. Elaine had 26 days left in that window when she collapsed. 26 days. I sat with that for a very long time. I did not move. I did not speak. I let the full mass of it settle onto me the way cold water does when you first step in, and you cannot breathe for a moment. And then you breathe, and you keep breathing, because that is the only thing left to do. Then I stood up. I straightened my jacket, and I made a decision. I was not going to be loud. I was not going to be sloppy. I was not going to give either of them the opportunity to see me coming and prepare for impact. I was going to be methodical. I was going to be precise. I was, for the first time in my life, going to treat something personal with the same cold, structured rigor I had brought to 34 years of building things that had to hold under pressure. I told Margaret Okafor everything, the super nomination, the timeline, the financial planner, all of it, laid out in sequence. She was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, "Daniel, I want you to do nothing except exist in that waiting room and be present for your wife. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said. "Good. Because I am going to put together something that has no exits." The following 72 hours were the longest of my life. But on the morning of the second day, Elaine opened her eyes. I have replayed this moment more times than I can count. She looked at the ceiling first. Then she turned her head and looked at me. And her face did the slow, assembling thing that faces do when a person is coming back from somewhere far away. Then she said, in a voice that was rough and tired and absolutely, completely, unmistakably hers, "Daniel, you look dreadful." I laughed. Genuinely laughed. Out loud. In the ICU. While a nurse looked at me with the expression of someone reassessing her career choices. But I could not help it. Because hearing Elaine's particular brand of affectionate, devastating commentary felt like someone had found the switch and turned everything back on. I leaned forward and said, "You're in intensive care, and you're critiquing my appearance," she said, still in that raspy, exhausted voice. "One of us has to maintain standards." I held her hand and did not let go for a very long time. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. She needed to heal first, and the full truth could wait a few more days. I told her she was safe. I told her I knew what had happened. I told her it was being handled. She looked at me for a long moment with those clear, perceptive eyes that had always been able to locate the truth in any room. She said, "It was Sophie, wasn't it?" Not a question. I didn't answer. I held her hand tighter. She closed her eyes and said, very quietly, "I always knew that girl had more ambition than conscience. I just never thought she'd turn it in this direction." Even half-conscious in a hospital bed, Elaine Whitmore was the sharpest person I had ever known. On day 4, Margaret called with news that rearranged my expression entirely. Gordon, because Gordon is Gordon, had quietly managed to obtain records from a health food supplier 2 suburbs over from where Sophie and Bryce lived. Sophie had purchased a specific supplement product on 4 separate occasions over 6 months. Always paying cash, always alone, except for the final visit where the car park camera showed Bryce's ute waiting at the curb. The supplement contained a compound that in concentrated, consistent doses produced exactly the toxicity profile Dr. Sharma had found in Elaine's blood work. Margaret also had the bank records. She had the digital trail of the withdrawals. She had the financial planner confirming the date of Elaine's nomination change and the processing window. And then there was this. Sophie, in what I can only describe as an astonishing act of self-sabotage, had called the financial planning firm twice in the weeks after Elaine's update, presenting herself as Elaine's personal assistant and asking about the status of the paperwork. She had called from her own mobile number. Twice. When Gordon told me, I stared at the wall of that waiting room for a full 15 seconds. Then I said, Gordon, did I raise a criminal or a complete idiot? Gordon said, Mate, the answer appears to be both simultaneously. They came on day 5. Of course they did. Bryce was carrying flowers, which told me everything I needed to know about how far removed from reality he had become, and Sophie walked in first and deployed the particular smile she had always used when she wanted something from me since she was about 7 years old. It did not reach her eyes by quite a significant margin. She said, Dad, we've been so worried. How is she? I looked at her. I looked at Bryce. I looked back at her. She's awake, I said. She's talking. She is going to make a full recovery. I watched something move behind Sophie's eyes. It was not relief. It was a very rapid, very quiet adjustment. The kind a person makes when a plan has failed and they need to figure out what the next position is. Bryce said, That's such wonderful news, Dan. The police are on their way, I said. Just like that. The same tone I might use to mention a change in the weather forecast. Sophie's face did something I had never seen it do before. Bryce went the color of old concrete. He said, What? Margaret Okafor lodged everything this morning. The supplement purchase records, the bank withdrawals, the phone calls to the financial planning firm. Both of them. From your mobile. Soph. Doctor. Sharma's toxicology report. All of it. Packaged very neatly. Sophie made a sound that I can only describe as the audible exit of composure from a human body. Bryce said, Dan. Just listen. Just for a second. Just, I said. There is no sentence either of you can say to me right now. There is nothing in the English language that reaches this. So, I need you to stop. He opened his mouth. I said, The flowers are lovely. Someone else can bring them to your mother. They were arrested in the hospital car park. Margaret had arranged the timing with the care of someone who understood that how a thing ends matters almost as much as that it ends. They were still holding the flowers when the officers approached. I watched from the window of the corridor. Gordon appeared beside me. I genuinely do not know when he arrived. He materializes this way when things are serious. We stood together and watched. He said, How are you going, Danny? I thought about it honestly, like I have aged 10 years in 5 days, like I need to sleep for a month, like I am simultaneously the most devastated I have ever been and the most certain I have ever been about anything in my life. He nodded. And Elaine? I looked back down the corridor toward her room. Through the small window in her door, I could see the shape of her in the bed, the soft light, the slow, steady movement of the monitors. Elaine, I said, is going to be fine. Elaine was always going to be fine. She is the most formidable person I have ever met, and she chose to spend 31 years with me. which proves beyond all doubt that she can survive absolutely anything. Gordon laughed. A real one. It bounced off the hospital corridor walls, and for just a moment, the weight of the whole thing lifted slightly. 3 months and 12 days later, Elaine came home. She walked through the front door on a Saturday morning in late autumn, when the light across the Ballarat ranges was doing that long gold thing it does before winter comes in properly. She stood in the hallway and looked around at everything, with the careful attention of someone cataloging what had nearly been taken from them. Then she turned to me and said, "The garden is an absolute disgrace, Daniel." I said, "I have been slightly preoccupied." She said, "The roses need cutting back. The gutters need clearing. And what on earth has happened to the lavender along the front fence?" I said, "Elaine." She said, "What?" I said, "You were in the ICU." She looked at me with complete serenity and said, "And now, I'm not. The lavender. Daniel." I called the gardener the following morning. Sophie and Bryce were charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and financial fraud. Margaret prosecuted with the focused energy of a woman who had been waiting decades for a case this clean and this complete. The trial ran for 9 days. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. I will not tell you the sentences because whatever number I give you will feel inadequate. And you would be right. What I will tell you is that when the verdict was read, I was seated in that courtroom next to Elaine, who was holding my hand with a grip considerably stronger than someone who had spent time in intensive care 3 months earlier had any right to produce. When it was over, she leaned close to me and said very quietly, "I want fish and chips." I said, "Right now?" She said, "I have been thinking about fish and chips for 11 weeks, Daniel. Do not make me ask twice." So we got fish and chips. Gordon came. Margaret came. Dr. Anita Sharma, who Elaine had apparently charmed completely during her recovery in the way Elaine charms everyone eventually, came. We sat around a table at a place overlooking Lake Wendouree, and we ate and we talked, and I watched my wife gesture dramatically while telling a story, the way she always does when she is well and happy, and I thought, there she is. There's Elaine. I said at the beginning of this story that I came home 3 days early and wished, for a moment, that I had stayed away longer. I take that back entirely. I am glad I cut the trip short. I am glad I pulled into that driveway. I am glad I saw what I saw and felt what I felt and moved the way I moved when every instinct in me said that something was wrong. Because if I had stayed in Cairns, if Neville hadn't fallen, if I had spent 2 more days on that boat and come home on Friday as planned, Elaine would not have made it. And I would have spent whatever years I had left, not knowing why, carrying a grief with a hole in it that no one could ever have filled. So no, I do not wish I had stayed away. I wish my daughter had been the person I believed I raised. But you cannot govern what people decide to become when they think no one is watching. You can only govern what you do the moment you realize they were wrong about that. I came home. I paid attention. I acted on what I found. That was the job. It has always been the job. Before I finish, I want to say something directly to anyone watching who has been generous with family members the way Elaine and I were generous. There are things I know now that I did not know then, and I want you to have them. Do not give any family member access to a shared account without a specific, limited purpose and regular review. Emergency access sounds generous and practical, and it can be, but access without oversight is not a gift. It is an open door. Review your accounts regularly, not because you distrust the people around you, but because you owe it to yourself and your partner to know exactly what is happening with your finances at all times. If someone in your household begins experiencing unexplained health changes, gradual fatigue, disorientation, anything that feels like decline without a clear cause, Do not accept the first explanation. Push for thorough blood work, including toxicology. Doctors are not routinely looking for deliberate poisoning. You may have to ask the question directly. And finally, if your instincts tell you something is wrong in your home, with someone you love, about a situation that doesn't quite add up, do not talk yourself out of that feeling. Do not make it comfortable. The discomfort is information. The instinct is a gift. Use it. Elaine is well. The literacy foundation she built is now operating in 14 regional Victorian schools, and she presented me with the full picture of it over a lamb roast one Sunday about 6 weeks after she came home, just as she had always planned. Never half measures, never just the seed. Always the tree. I looked at what she had quietly built, and I looked at her, and I thought about the fact that someone had tried to prevent this from existing, had tried to take this woman, and everything she was still going to do, out of the world. Then I picked up my fork and said, "This is the best roast you've ever made," she said. "It's the same as every other Sunday, Daniel." I said, "I know." That's what I said. She smiled. And that, after everything, was more than enough. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe to American Home Voices and share it with someone who needs to hear it. These stories matter. Thank you genuinely for being here.